But yeah, people are very much enticed by Barbenheimer. But I do want to say this though about Pirates of the Caribbean, and I kind of teased this a little bit earlier because you watch these movies, and I did watch all three of them over the weekend
Oh,
in
nice.
preparation for this conversation, and I just find it astounding how well these movies hold up. All three of them are quite good,
Yeah. Yeah.
very good.
What is your ranking of the three? Is it release order for them?
Well, so Curse of the Black Pearl, I think, will always be my favorite of the three.
Sure. Same here.
That film is so good, and I want to say pre this weekend I would probably go in release order 1, 2, 3, but I kind of on this rewatch I kind of loved three a little bit more,
I'm with you
and
there. Yeah.
and I think there are two reasons why. One, it has a little bit of a darker underbelly to it, with that opening
Mhm.
of the hangings is kind of creepy and poignant, and it's
How
interesting.
did Disney let
I
Gore Verbinski do that?
it's that, again, in the context of today, that's not a sequence that would get the green light. They
Oh
would
my.
cut that in a
Well,
heartbeat, right?
I do have a theory, but you keep talking, then I'll get to
Okay.
why I think that maybe he got away with it.
So there's that element of it. The Johnny Depp and Davy Jones locker, that whole sequence has a Verbinski weirdness to it that I love. And there's also them passing through all of the dead bodies, and there's something about that whole sequence that again embodies this. Just has a tinge of a darker underbelly
Yeah.
than what you would expect from Disney in the modern era. And then the other thing that I think has really started to separate itself from the second movie, Barbosa, is
Yeah.
back.
Yeah.
And that character, oh my, Jeffrey Rush, I will say this to the day I die. He deserved an Oscar for that role. I don't care what movie. He
I
is
mean,
so good at these
we're
movies.
we're we're,
He's
we're
so
not gonna
good.
we're focusing on the trilogy, right? We're obviously
Yes.
not gonna be talking about On Stranger Tides or Dead Men Tell No Tales, which are
Yeah. I
clearly
don't
the
know what those
lesser.
are.
Well, I mean, what I was about to say was that the only reason why I'll put Dead Men Tell No Tales above On Stranger Tides is because of Jeffrey Rush in that
Yes,
one
I
moment towards
agree.
the end.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um.
no, yeah, Barbosa is just spectacular in these movies
Mhm.
and is endlessly quotable. Everything he does it just elicits this magnetism that just bursts into the frame. And he's just having a lot of fun, and that's
Yeah.
what these movies are meant to be, right? Like there is a lot of fun to be had, and he plays it up to 10, but is so great. Like he's playing it up, but not overly over the top. Like it still functions within the confines of what these movies are trying to be, and there is like a dramatic backbone to them as well.
Yeah.
And there's a craft to these movies. It's not just, hey, here's $200 million, go make a blockbuster, and who cares what you do? People will come and see it.
Yeah.
It's not that at all. Like
No.
there is a real vision here, and a narrative that brings it all together. That's certainly a little contrived at times and
Yeah.
manufactured, but on the whole, I think the writing does a great job of letting these characters breathe a little bit for them to just play it up, have some fun, but also bring stability to that dramatic and emotional through line that we see
Mhm.
throughout all three of them, and it
Yeah.
just threads that needle impeccably, I think. And Barbosa is certainly a big part of that.
He is certainly a big part of that, and he has a really strong presence in At World's End that certainly keeps your eyes on the screen and your interests there. But
Yeah.
I'm with you. I've always found At World's End, as messy as that film is, I find it really fascinating. And as I've gotten older, I've kind of appreciated these three films for being a bit loose in their
Mhm.
narratives and trying to challenge the audience as far as what trust ultimately is.
Mhm.
Because I feel like with movies like this, team up movies like this, especially swashbucklers that don't necessarily deal with pirate lore, we're kind of conditioned to, see this camaraderie, right? This team up of sorts and enjoy their time together. But At World's End kind of suggests that maybe these characters don't really like each other all that much,
Mhm.
that they're really just using each other for their own selfish gains, but that's kind of
That's
the
a lot of
pirate
what it is.
ethos. I mean, that is the
It
pirate
is.
ethos, right? Every man for
Yeah.
themselves, right?
Yeah.
So and it's also why I've also appreciated The Curse of the Black Pearl more as time has gone on, because it's a movie that's really testing what allegiance ultimately is. It's about the
Yeah.
anti-heroes. It's not really a movie about heroes and villains. There's really no clear like good versus evil in any of these movies. I'd say the one that's the most easy, like, the one that's the easiest, I should say, to, I guess, follow is Dead Man's Chest, because it has a very direct MacGuffin that's kind of tying everyone together. So when I was younger,
Yeah.
that was my favorite of the three, but now I see it as perhaps the most simple-minded of the three in that
It's still a
regard.
good movie, though.
I mean,
I do really like it.
I'm not trying to say that as a knock on the film. It's just I
Mhm.
feel more challenged by the bookends of this
Mhm.
trilogy nowadays,
Yeah.
and whether that's something that Gore Verbinski intended, I don't know. It's possible that with At World's End, at least, he just let the narrative get the better of him, and it kind of ran with itself.
Sure.
But I think, given the fact that this is about pirate lore, that is ultimately about um, people that are just selfish, right? And that's kind
Yeah.
of the whole point of this. So the whole back and forth and double crossing of all that made more sense as I looked at
Yeah.
it from that angle.
I mean, what I love with what you're talking about there, it's easy to point that more directly at the more conventional pirates, let's
Mhm.
say between Jack Sparrow and Barbossa and
Mhm.
Davy Jones,
Yeah.
and where they all fit within the confines of what you're talking about. And Cutler Beckett becomes a significant part of that as well.
Mhm.
However, our lovebirds, Will Turner and Elizabeth Swann, also get caught up in this.
They
And
do.
some of
Yeah.
this comes back to the middle film, where, of course, Elizabeth makes that she makes a choice toward Jack that Will sees. He doesn't quite
I
understand the context
love
of it.
that so
It's
much.
great. And then and it's interesting, right? Because what she tells Jack in the moment is, I'm not sorry, but immediately regrets it or
Well, that
immediately
that's
feels the burden of it.
that is the most fascinating thing about Dead Man's Chest. I think the second half of Dead Man's Chest might be the best Pirates movie. It's really
Mhm.
the first half getting to that, where it's really like spinning its wheels from a plot mechanic standpoint.
Literally
And
spinning the wheels as they're like going
I wasn't
down
even
the.
trying to do that, but you're right. That is a very good observation. A very good set piece, mind you. But yeah,
Yeah,
you're
I
right. That
enjoyed
is
it.
what the
Yeah.
movie is actually doing. But
Yeah.
it gets to a really interesting moment regarding Elizabeth Swann. And here's this someone from high society that is finding herself kind of enamored by this pirate's life and sort of
Yeah.
torn between both of those lifestyles. And that choice that she makes, it's all a red herring. Like
Yeah.
she clearly doesn't have that kind of love and affection for Jack Sparrow as she says that she does. She's really just using him in many ways.
Well,
Uh,
and I
and I love
think
that.
what's fascinating is, because what she claims in the moment is the Kraken is after you,
Yeah.
and therefore it allow us to escape. But that's
Yep.
not really what's going on,
Yeah.
because earlier in the movie, she has the compass when they're trying to find the heart.
Yeah.
And when she opens it, it points to Jack Sparrow
Yeah.
and not the heart. So
Yeah.
she is clearly conflicted between Will and this life of piracy, as you're talking about. So when she chains him to the Black Pearl, she is hoping that this is her way of escape herself,
Yeah.
for not just from the Kraken, but emotionally. But then she starts to feel the burden of that, and that carries itself into At World's End, where Will, because Elizabeth isn't honest or transparent about any of this, he decides to take things into his own hands as it relates to his father. He schemes up this own plan of his own and doesn't
Hmm.
bring Elizabeth into it. So even though they are together, there is a romance there. There is this interesting duality, though, that they are kind of in this for themselves simultaneously. Like they don't
Yeah.
bring each other into it. So there is like a lack of trust or a lack of transparency,
Yeah.
where they kind of have their own schemes going on without telling each other, which plays into what you're talking about in terms of a pirate's life and just being about themselves. That is those two characters as well. It's not just the pirates of these movies,
Yeah.
but
It's not just
those
about
two
the sword swinging or the
yeah, it's
treasure
not just
hunting.
the swashbuckling, but
Yeah.
it's the romance at the center of it that is also the pirate's code.
Yeah.
That I think is really fascinating, and then all of that crystallizes in this incredible fashion at the end, where they decide to get married in the middle of this fight.
Yeah.
Bring back Barbosa for this incredible ceremony
Uh,
that is just blockbuster fun at its best.
but
It is so
it's
good.
well shot and well made blockbuster fun, and that's the
Yes.
one thing that we need to talk about here, and why we're always referencing these movies in comparison to what blockbuster filming looks like nowadays, especially from Disney,
Yeah.
because these movies look amazing. They've
They do
aged
look
so
really good.
well.
Yeah.
Like, let's look at just the simple design and the effects work of Davy Jones. The tentacles. And it's not even just the inventiveness and the creepiness of it. It's the color shading of it. It's the use of shadows, the three-dimensional space that it takes advantage of. It still looks very tangible. It
Yeah.
looks like you can actually like dangle those tentacles if you really wanted to.
It's so
It's
good.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best examples of it is when Will is trying to get the key from under the tentacles.
Yeah.
And he's having to hold them up. He's got a little stick in his mouth, and he's trying to kind of and you're right. There is a tangibility there that is
Yeah.
really incredible, knowing that the character is CGI.
Yeah.
And yet when Will is somehow getting in there, it feels as if he's actually having to maneuver around these tentacles that exist
Yeah.
in front of him.
Yeah.
Like it's an incredible effect that is really great, and we just don't really see all that much these days.
I know.
And yeah, it's wonderful.
There's a lot that Gore Verbinski fought for with regard to the visual effects and trying to keep them as realistic as possible. And I mentioned earlier that I did have a slight theory as to how these films got away with what they did. And I don't know all of the details, but from what I've heard, there was another project around the same time that Disney was really focused on, which allowed Gore Verbinski a lot more creative freedom than most other filmmakers of a property like this.
Uh-huh.
And I think that's why we got to see, like children getting hanged in the beginning of At World's End.
Crazy.
I mean,
He was able
that
to do
is
that.
that is damn near close to R-rated territory just based on subject matter. It is.
Oh, I agree.
It is damn near close.
And singing that song, like it is genuinely bleak
It is. And
haunting.
but this is what I love about Gore Verbinski as a filmmaker is that he is willing to kind of gross you out. I mean, there are elements of his films that remind me of other filmmakers. I mean, we just spent a lot of time talking about Tim Burton, for instance, and there are certainly some Burton-esque things that he is influenced by. But a movie like Mouse Hunt, for instance, his first ever major film, which is a film marketed to kids and almost plays like a live-action Tom and Jerry cartoon, is also kind of a horror film, right? I mean, it's a gross movie. It's a very ugly and unpleasant movie at times, and I love it for those reasons.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was watching Curse of the Black Pearl on Friday night this past weekend. And that, I would say, of the three is probably the most close to horror that these films get. But yeah, I think like there's this incredible shot where the zombie pirates are walking under the water, and you see this lighting behind them that makes them almost come off like these shadows, but you see the skeletons just glisten under the water, and it's an incredibly evocative shot. And you know that it's primarily CGI, and somehow it is still incredibly redolent. And I was just sitting there going, how? Like 20 years later, we are literally 20 years later, this film just celebrated its 20th anniversary. And I don't know if there's not many blockbusters of this size that can do that these days.
It's a movie that if it were to come out this year, we would be begging for it to get a Best Visual Effects nomination at the Oscars.
Yeah, seriously.
Like, that's
The same
incredible.
effect. Yeah.
But
It
it's but
truly is astounding.
but I love, one of the things that we keep talking about so much with regard to why the film is so effective is not just what it's doing visually, but it's also what it's doing narratively. So I do want to give some credit to the writers here, Ted Elliott and Terry Russo,
Yeah.
Stuart Beatty and Jay Wolpert, I think are co-writers here in some way. I think they might just have story credits if I'm not mistaken. But, Ted
Yeah.
Elliott and Terry Russo are certainly known for their swashbuckling antics, co-writing movies like Aladdin or The Mask of Zorro, for instance. But
Makes sense.
I
Yeah.
mean, here, I don't know if the idea of the pirate's code and the ambiguities of what defines heroes and villains was on the page. I think I wouldn't be surprised if someone like Gore Verbinski found those themes and just chose to heighten them in a certain way within this trilogy.
With the performances, which is a big part of it as
Well, that's
well.
another thing we need to talk about. I mean, say what you will about Johnny Depp as a person nowadays, but he gives a hell of a performance, a
It's
brave
a memorable
performance in
character.
the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we talked about someone like Paul Rubens and what he did with characters like Pee Wee Herman or the Spleen in
Yeah.
Mystery Men. There's no one else who could do those roles.
Yeah.
And the same could be said about Johnny Depp and Captain Jack Sparrow.
I agree. Say what you will about him as a person, and I am certainly not going to vouch for him at all. I am not his biggest fan outside of these movies, but I will have to agree with you. His performance in these films are genuinely incredible, and yeah,
Yeah.
I love how he's able to play that that faux bravado that Jack Sparrow has, this ego that he elicits constantly throughout this film when he's
hmm
really just this weakling underneath who wants to run away at every turn.
hmm
And how he balances that out and gives the character this incredible credence at times is
Yeah.
just remarkable. I think about those scenes between him and Elizabeth and Dead Man's Chest, and there's some tension between the two actors there and the
Yeah.
characters, and it often comes through not in dialogue but simply how they look at each other, how they react to each other. But then
hmm
there's the fun buffoonery of him in the first one. This is the day you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow, and he runs off. And then there's that moment of him in Davy Jones's locker, and
Yeah.
as weird as it is, like that's a scene that could fall on its face quite easily if not handled properly. But he does a great job of tapping into the psychology of the character in
He
that
lays
moment.
a
So
freaking egg. I mean,
he does. Yeah, no,
it's
it's
I mean,
wild.
I hate using the director's description. Like there are certain director's descriptions we try to avoid, right? It's like when we talked about Oppenheimer and we use the term Malikian. We
Yeah,
sometimes try to avoid certain things, but I can't help but say that Davy Jones locker sequence is kind of Lynchian in many
yeah,
ways.
sure. Yeah,
But and even if he were Verbinski specifically, even if he were copying David Lynch or at least inspired by him, the charm of that sequence is that it is being lumped into a Disney blockbuster. Like
yeah.
that is incredible. And yet it still feels of a piece with the movie. Like it doesn't feel
Mhm.
like a weird sequence just for the director to get a little handsy with his filmmaking, right?
Yeah,
Like it honestly kind of meshes with the entire nearly 3-hour film.
yeah,
Which again, tonal balancing act. Verbinski, whatever he's doing there, whatever the performances are doing to make that all work, the synergy there is quite perfect. I don't think At World's End is a perfect film. I think at nearly 3 hours, it is a little. It's hard to watch pretty often, right? I mean, it can be a pretty insufferable film at times, but I love that it is. Like it
I
really
have I
challenges
have a
you.
ball with it. I watched all
I
3 hours in one sitting, just at
I
the
mean, I
greatest
can still
time.
do that too, but like I don't think I could take another 5 minutes of it after. Once the end credits roll, I'm good. I'll say that.
Okay, fair enough. I guess I love the audacity of it, and those dueling components we talked about earlier. I think are daring
hmm
in these films, and the performances are just absolutely incredible to me. So, and it's not just Johnny Depp. I mean, I talked about Jeffrey Rush. He's genuinely amazing
Yeah.
Orlando Bloom, Keira Knightley, very good. Bill
Yep.
Nighy as Davy Jones, come on, like just kills it.
Perfect.
Like it's
Perfect.
so
He's great.
good.
He's wonderful.
All of these performances really go for it. And we sort of talked about this. When did we talk? Was this last week on the show? Yeah, because we were talking
Maybe.
about Pacific Rim. And I was
Yes.
talking about
Yes.
how the performances in that film kind of make it what it is because so many blockbusters, you get these actors that are simply there for a paycheck and they might do a fine job, but that's really all that it is.
Sincerity.
Sincerity is key. That was such a big thing for me with Pacific Rim,
Yep.
and I would label the at least this trilogy as the same thing. These are actors that aren't just here for a paycheck. They're delivering real performances that, again, tap into the fun and the comedy of it all, but also those dramatic through lines. And I think it all comes through incredibly well inside of Verbinski's direction and the craft that he brings here. I mean, this is a film, speaking of At World's End, where its budget was $300 million. We've just talked about a lot over the last few weeks about how absurd $300 million are for a lot of these movies across the board. But in 2003, that was very rare.
That was very rare.
This was the
adjust that to
most expensive film at the
inflation.
time.
That's a lot of money.
Exactly. That'd be like $500 million.
That's
by
$500
today.
million.
Yeah, that's James Cameron territory right there.
Yeah. But this at least looks like there's money on the page.
Exactly.
Right?
That's what I'm trying to get at. Like you see the money on the screen with the visual effects as we were talking about and the CGI, which as you somewhat joked about, but I don't think you're wrong. If this came out, the same movie came out today, it would be up for best visual effects.
Yeah.
And then and not only that, but the cinematography on its own, like they're in real locations. You see the tangibility of that. You feel that, where if those movies are made today, they're on some sort of set in Hollywood or Atlanta or Toronto somewhere. And I'm sure that with these films, there's still some of that going on. But when you see them out at sea, like there's still a lot of you do see them on actual places, on actual islands.
Yeah.
That comes through, and it certainly makes these films, I think, all the more resonant. All these years later, can we now please talk about the score? I've done my best to wait this long.
I was
and
waiting.
It's been killing me.
I didn't want to have to be the one to introduce this topic, so I was just waiting for you to go ahead and have the floor.
Look, I tried really hard. I was like, let's start with Jeffrey Rush. Let's talk about Verbinski and his direction, and we'll get to Johnny Depp and the performances. Like I tried really hard to wait, but now I just want to rave about these scores because, oh my God. And I know Hans Zimmer didn't do the score.
Did he though? I mean,
Curse
there's
of the Black Pearl, but it's one of his guys,
Yeah.
and he's on record of writing that main theme.
Yeah.
I think the only reason he didn't do it is because there was another film he was doing at the time. I can't remember the details.
I think you're right.
So what Klaus Badal comes in to score that first movie, which is great still.
Yeah, it's great.
Like I don't know how much of it is technically Zimmer. It wouldn't surprise me if he did most of it still, but he's not credited. Either way, the score to Curse of the Black Pearl, that main theme that of course plays throughout the rest of them, is an all-timer. It is one of the best musical cues I have ever heard. It's so much fun. It raises the hair on my arms each time. And I think one of my favorite elements of it. So, well, I guess let me backtrack a little bit because the first time we kind of hear it is when the character of Jack Sparrow is introduced.
Yeah.
I think. I'm trying to recall. I just watched the film the other day. Anyway, one of the greatest character introductions we've seen when Jack walks.
Oh
off
yeah,
that boat
and the
there
ship sinks. Yeah,
is it sinking? It's really great.
What a great sight gag.
It's wonderful. But maybe, actually, now that I'm thinking about it out loud, the first time we actually hear that main theme might be when, right after he rescues Elizabeth. And, but they're going to take him to jail. So he, brings her close and, puts a knife to her chest. And that's when he does the "Today is the day you almost caught Jack Sparrow,"
Yeah,
and then he
and then it
runs off
ramps
and he
up.
tries to escape, and that's when that theme kicks in.
Mhm.
And watching it just a few days ago, I still get as giddy watching that as I did 20 years
That's
ago. Like,
movie magic right there. That's
it's just so
blockbuster movie
good.
magic. Yeah, but
It's
it
so
it
good.
just goes to show the importance of a great movie score. And while musically this score isn't doing the same thing as say a John Williams would, right? That doesn't change the fact that a movie like E.T., for instance, is also defined by that score. The movie is
Mhm.
carried by that great score. And
Yeah.
that's not a knock on E.T. because it's such a perfectly constructed movie in its own right. But the score helps connect all of those perfections together, which is
Yes.
more or less what the scores for these movies are doing. I think all three
Yeah.
scores are amazing because they almost feel like the movie almost functions like an opera or something,
Mhm.
right? Like a ballet. Like it feels so intertwined and interconnected and so well choreographed to the music. It's just all perfectly
Well,
constructed in that regard.
a great movie score, especially in a movie in a blockbuster like Pirates of the Caribbean. But yeah, I think this goes across the board because you can say
Yeah.
the same thing about dramas,
Hmm.
sci-fi comedies, even like a really great score will connect you to what's happening on screen all the more. At least that's what it's doing in my case. And the
Sure.
score to these films brings such a fervent energy
Yeah.
that is undeniable. So when these characters are making the choices they do, and we see them get in the action they're involved with, and that main theme kicks in, or all of the accompanying music, it's not just the main theme, you're so utterly engaged. I think that's why, again, going back to At World's End, despite it being 3 hours, I am utterly engrossed with what's happening
Sure.
because I love Barbosa. He's a lot of fun. There's the weirdness of it, as we talked about, and all of the shenanigans between all of the pirates. But connecting all of those things is this Hans Zimmer score that is so captivatingly fun
Hmm.
that by the time the movie starts to when it ends, I'm like, I don't even, how did 3 hours just go by? Like, I just feel so like I'm such a part of the movie. And it's certainly the case with the first two as well.
Hmm.
That it's just such a breathtaking part of the experience. And to the point where, and I mentioned this on Twitter during COVID because I did one of the first things I did when we all went into lockdown is I showed my son Sam these movies. He had never seen them before. And
Okay.
at that time, I probably I hadn't seen them since maybe they came out or, maybe like 2006, 2007. I caught up with them. Maybe
Hmm. Hmm.
it'd been a while, been a long time.
Yeah.
So we went back to revisit them and it has everything that we've been talking about. But the one thing that really stood out to me is the endings to those movies.
Ah,
When you
yeah.
talk about walking out of a theater with this feeling, whatever it may be. We talked about this with Oppenheimer. You walk out of the theater after watching Oppenheimer and you just feel dirty. Like that last line is so haunting and
Yeah.
jarring, and it's just a movie that you have to linger with. Like it's so horrific.
You take it with you,
You
right?
take it with
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
And a great movie will have you feeling some sort of way when you walk out.
Yeah.
Oppenheimer, it is kind of that bleak, cynical tone that no
Yeah.
one is going for.
Yeah.
Or in the case of Barbie, you walk out joyous because it's such a fun movie.
And yet you still take that with you. A very different feeling, but you take it with you.
You
And you're
take
right.
it with you. With Pirates of the Caribbean, those films are quintessential in this way as well because they end with some sort of fun little quip that is rooted in pirate lore. And as soon as that last line hits, that main theme kicks in and immediate chills.
It's
Like
all about
it's
musical timing.
incredible
Yeah. But
musical
it's
timing,
not
the
even just
editing of
that.
it.
Yeah, these movies end, all three of them narratively end in ways that kind of secretly challenge the audience because that's kind of the
Mhm.
thing we were talking about a lot with these movies and how they sort of deconstruct the idea of heroes and villains and, team up camaraderie and swashbucklers like this, the way that they're really more about the pirate's code than they are about the pirate's friendship.
Yeah.
And you leave these movies with that euphoria that we're talking about, but you kind of start to think more about it and you realize that there's more complicated nature to all of these movies. And admittedly, when I first saw Curse of the Black Pearl in 2003, I did see it when it first came out. I was not a big fan of it because I found myself a little too challenged by what it was doing. And I just didn't get it, like the whole like back and forth between certain characters, the mistrust between them, the fact that we didn't really have a clear idea of who our heroes and who our villains were, like why they're fighting each other, even if they know that these zombie pirates can't be killed. Like all of those things I found myself like constantly thinking about as a kid. And then I realized that's all part of the point. And,
Yes.
and as you get older and you leave these movies with these feelings, it forces you to think about these movies more. And that's why like these aesthetic choices have merit and have purpose. They're not just there for flair. They're there to keep you engaged so you can find yourself thinking about these more complicated ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how Verbinski and his team is able to tap into all of that because, you think of the end of Curse of the Black Pearl. And this is why creating a character like Jack Sparrow that is so engaging is important because he's the last thing we see. If you don't care about the character, then this ending isn't going to be as impactful. The other thing that probably helps is being on the ride because you've been on the ride and you hear a lot of the terminology that is sung there or that's said with these characters as you go throughout the ride.
Sure.
That is a part of it as well. And, or even the one of the, I forget the name of it, but like that main song that comes with the ride, because a lot of the dialogue from that is in the film itself. It's a part of this ending, right? Because, we get to this final ending where Sparrow gets back to the Black Pearl and it's his ship again. It's the first time he's connected with it since the beginning of the movie. He's the captain of the Black Pearl again. So he's a character that we've come to enjoy, that we've come to love, and we want to see more of him. And he starts singing lyrics from the song that is a part of the Disney ride. So the last thing he says is, "Drink up, me hearties, yo-ho." So there's a little nostalgia there. But as soon as he says that, and this goes back to the timing of it all, and that euphoric feeling you feel, because as soon as he says that, that's when that theme kicks in, and it is just impeccable. And
it is.
I absolutely love it. It's just incredible. And then with Dead Man's Chest, I might like this one even more because because the ending to this film, honestly, one of my favorites maybe ever. Not best. Let me be clear about that. It's not necessarily one of the best endings, but I love this, right? Because it's everything we talked about earlier. You get the tension between Will and Elizabeth. There's still some ambiguity there, but the idea comes up like Jack Sparrow, who we had just witnessed been killed by this Kraken. The idea is proposed. What would you do to save him? And everyone there is like, yes, I am on board. What do we have to do? And she's like, well, if you're going to World's End, you're going to need a captain that knows those waters. And down comes this character. And at the time, we don't know who it is, right?
Oh,
and
yeah. Nowadays, we would be able to predict it because we're so conditioned to those twists, right?
Oh, I know.
Yeah.
But that first time, you don't know.
Yeah.
And you see the character walking down, and Zimmer is teasing that theme just a little bit, like it's starting to ramp up slowly. And then all of a sudden, Barbossa appears and says something to the effect of, he takes the bite of the apple and it's like, what's going on with my ship?
Yeah.
And then that's when that theme kicks in.
The black. See,
it's just so good.
We often criticize movies, like let's say, we often criticize movies like, let's say, Fast X, right? For just ending on a sheer cheap cliffhanger.
Yes.
But you can do it well. You can do that thing well. Case in point, Dead Man's Chest, right?
Exactly. It is Incredible. I love it so much. It's honestly one of the best parts of that movie, and it's
Well,
literally the last scene.
like I said, the whole back half of Dead Man's Chest, the second that Davy Jones himself is introduced, I think it might be the best Pirates movie of the three.
Yeah, sure.
Really, the whole wheel spinning analogy that we joked about some moments ago, like that's really the biggest problem in trying to find plot mechanics as opposed to character motivations to bring all these characters
Yeah.
together for something, right?
Still fun to be had, but yes.
It's fun. It's not bad, but
Mm.
for a franchise or at least a trilogy, separating the trilogy from the actual other movies, for a trilogy that was more defined by this idea of the Pirates Code and the ambiguity of what these relationships were all about, I like that it was more about character motivations coming together and the selfishness of these characters as opposed to a plot that brought them back together, which is why
Yes.
I
Sure.
think comparatively the first half of Dead Man's Chest does feel like it feels like plotting as opposed to storytelling, right?
Yeah.
And not bad plotting, but comparatively, I think there are definitely more wheels spinning.